Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Mainstream Mondays. Today we are talking about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. So I hope you'll stick around. We'll be talking about cast and crew, production, my thoughts on the film, where you can watch it and all that jazz. You may notice this is a work in progress, so it's not perfect yet, but I brought out all my horror VHS and I'm sort of working on making a display. As you can see, I don't have the thing is I had a lot of tapes at one time, and then I decided I would switch my tapes to DVDs or Blu-rays. But then I know you're probably laughing, but the nostalgia grabbed a hold of me again, and I was like, God, I kind of want to like still look at these things. And so I front faced a few of my favorites. There's Nightmare on Elm Street and Near Dark, Halloween 3. So I'm just kind of working on that a little bit, shaking it up a little bit. But today we are talking about Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan from 1982. This is a sci-fi film, obviously, from the creation of Gene Roddenberry, and a follow-up, if you will, or a continuation of the original crew story from the original Star Trek series from the 60s. And this is Star Trek moving into the 80s. And I remember going to see this at the movie theater with my family. Actually, my stepdad, rest in peace, was a huge fan of the original Star Trek series, and the hype that this movie was getting when it came out, we were all like, me and my stepdad were like so excited. I think we didn't really say it, but we were very excited to see this. My mom and my sister probably not so much, but it's interesting because I don't think I saw the first Star Trek movie, the motion picture, before I saw this. So I didn't realize what the original picture was like, and then when I saw this, it was like, oh my God, this is like comparable to like Star Wars or something. For me, again, I was 12 years old, so that mindset, I was like, this was action packed, it was fun, it had some almost like horror elements to it. It is the special effects were cool, like this was the bomb. So anyway, we'll get to that. So this movie was directed by Nicholas Meyer, who also was the writer on Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and he directed and wrote Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, and directed the movie The Day After. Now, some of you who are my age or older probably remember The Day After. This was a made-for-TV movie about nuclear war, and we actually talked about that movie at school. Like, I think it was my history teacher was like, okay, this movie's going to be on tonight. It's going to be really disturbing, and we'll talk about it in class tomorrow. If you can see it, try to watch it, because it was on mainstream TV. I think it was on ABC, and it was a big deal The Day After. And it was really, for the time, it was quite scary because everyone was kind of freaked out about nuclear war back then. And I know that probably sounds really like quaint, but in high school, I was actually in a anti-nuclear war group, STAND, which was Students Together Against Nuclear Destruction. So, and we were talking about like, world politics and nuclear war, nuclear weapons and all that stuff. And so it's probably hard to imagine for a younger person now, but like back then, like it was palpable and it was in the news and everything. So The Day After, yeah, I haven't seen it since, so I don't know if it holds up, but at the time that was a pretty intense movie. So Nicholas Meyer did, some work on some other Star Trek films. I will say Star Trek VI, Undiscovered Country is also a little hidden gem if you like Star Trek, like the original series. It's a good movie. I liked it. This movie, of course, stars William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, Walter Koenig, George Takei, Nichelle Nichols, plus Ricardo Montalban returns as Khan, and rest in peace, Kirstie Alley was in this as a young Star Trek officer. I did do my research, and all of those people are dead, with the exception of William Shatner, Walter Koenig, and George Takei. So rest in peace to most of the original cast of Star Trek, which is really sad. I, for one, was very sad when Leonard Nimoy passed away, because he was just, when I was a kid, I loved Leonard Nimoy, and Spock especially, of course. But then, he did that kind of like supernatural show in the 70s, which I remember watching. And then he's been in a bunch of movies, of course. I think it was Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the '78 version. Um, I just always really thought he was a cool guy. He's also a really good photographer. So yeah, so most of the cast is now gone. I think William Shatner just celebrated his 90th birthday, so pretty amazing. The synopsis for Star Trek II: with the assistance of the Enterprise crew, Admiral Kirk must stop an old nemesis, Khan Noonien Singh, from using life-generating Genesis device as the ultimate weapon. The life-generating Genesis device. So yeah, so these oh, what's the word I'm looking for? But they were like scientists that were part of oh, the United Federation of Planets. I think they were working on building this Genesis project, which is basically like they launched this thing to a dead world, and it would like invigorate the planet and create all this foliage, and people could live on this planet. So this device was still being worked on, and they were still looking for planets to test it on. And but Khan was, hot on their heels, and he wants to use this Genesis device and hold it over the United Federation of Planets to kind of like threaten Kirk, and then eventually chase him down using one of their own ships. And so, so this movie was action-packed compared to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which was a little bit more of a slow burn, a little bit more cerebral, and really the end of Star Trek Star Trek: The Motion Picture was like, great. I watched it probably about 5 or 6 years ago for the first time in a long time, and it really blew me away because that movie gets people kind of say like, oh, it wasn't good, there was no action in it. But if you're a fan of pure science fiction, Star Trek: The Motion Picture is your jam, like it is. But this one, Star Trek II: Wrath of Khan, just came right out of the gates swinging, and it was all action, and like I said, it was quite thrilling for a 12-year-old sitting in the theater watching it on the big screen. This is the second film in the Star Trek series, as I mentioned, and it acts as a sequel to the television episode Space Seed from 1967, starring, of course, a younger Ricardo Montalban. After the lackluster critical response to the first film, series creator Gene Roddenberry was removed from the production and, according to Shatner, quote, kicked upstairs to the ceremonial position of executive consultant. So, I'm not sure how Star Trek: The Motion Picture did as far as like box office wise, but critically, I think a lot of critics just panned it, and fans just weren't sure what to think of it. So they said, Gene, you go upstairs and just do some consulting, and we'll be down here making this like action movie. Leonard Nimoy had not intended to have a role in the sequel, but was enticed back on the promise that his character would be given a dramatic death scene. Negative test audience reaction to Spock's death led to significant revisions to the ending over Meyer's objections, the director. The production team used various cost-cutting techniques to keep within budget, using miniature models from past projects and reusing sets, effects footage, and costumes from the first film. The Enterprise was refurbished for its space shots, with its shiny exterior dulled down and extra detail added to the frame, compared to the newly rebuilt Reliant, which was the ship that Chekhov was commanding. The Enterprise was hated by the effects artists and cameramen. It took 8 people to mount the model and a forklift truck to move it. So it was a pretty massive model. I was wondering about this too, because I can't remember in the first Star Trek, in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I think the Enterprise was, I'm sure some Trekkies will correct me, but I thought it was like all shiny and new. And I wondered if maybe with the second one, they wanted to make it a bit more gritty. They were kind of thinking of the Star Wars franchise where, like, the Millennium Falcon was all beat up and dents and parts missing and dirty and that. So I wonder if they were trying to make it look more lived in and realistic. But The Wrath of Khan was one of the first films to extensively use computer graphics to improve the visual quality and production speed of special effects shots. Among the film's technical achievements was cinema's first entirely computer-generated sequence, ILM, that's Industrial Light and Magic's animation for the demonstration of the effects of the Genesis device on a barren planet. So, yeah, at the time, I mean, again, you have to take yourself back in time. Like, I mean, if you watch, The Arrival or like Blade Runner 2049 or Dune, like these modern movies, the visuals are wild. And so, but back then in 1982, I mean, it was still kind of like, ships hanging from a thread kind of thing. Like, I mean, this was, so that ILM animation for the Genesis project was like really like mind blowing at the time. I remember as a kid being in theater and just thinking like, whoa, what is this like crazy compute? In fact, I probably didn't even know like CGI wasn't even a thing, like a phrase that people threw around. So this was pretty cool. The budget for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan was $12 million and the box office was $97 million. So this movie did fairly well for its time. And bear in mind, again, 1982 was uh, a year full of competition at the box office. I think 1982, I always think about this, like 1982 was one of the coolest years for cinema. I mean, we had The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, you had Blade Runner, you had E.T., you had Star Trek II, just to name a few. I mean, there was so many good movies that year. The competition in the box office was intense. So this movie did, quite well considering all that. Principal photography began on November 9th of 1981 and ended on January 29th of 1982, a day before my birthday. Spock's death was shot over 3 days, during which no visitors were allowed on set. Spock's death was to be irrevocable, but Nimoy had such a positive experience during the filming that he asked if he could add a way for Spock to return in a later film. That was a spoiler, obviously, if you've never seen this movie, but I won't give away, does Spock return? I don't know. I'm not going to ruin that for you if you haven't seen these movies. I already ruined that, obviously Spock dies. Spock's death in the film was widely reported during production. Trekkies wrote letters of protest. One paid for trade press advertisements urging Paramount to change the plot. And Nimoy even received death threats. He received death threats for dying in a movie. So, don't say that like fans nowadays are wild, crazy, because back then, and Trekkies, I'm sure I'm going to get some heat for this review just because Trekkies are very, or Trekkers, however you prefer, are very passionate about these things. And so if I offend anyone, I'm sorry. It's just my opinion and my research. But suffice to say, I am a Star Trek fan in general, but I grew up on Star Wars, so, But my stepdad, like I said, was a huge Star Trek fan. We always watched Star Trek, the 60s Star Trek, at lunchtime on the weekends, Saturday. I remember sitting up with my dad watching Star Trek on TV and kind of thought it was pretty cool. I didn't know what was going on. I remember always like pulling on my dad's shirt sleeve and saying like, why is that person's skin green? Or like, always asking these questions. I remember my stepdad was relatively patient, but there came a point in the episode where he'd be like, okay, just watch the show, because he got tired of answering questions. The soundtrack was James Horner's first major film score and was written in 4.5 weeks. The resulting 72 minutes of music was then performed by a 91-piece orchestra. Recording sessions for the score began on April 12th, 1982 at the Warner Brothers lot, the Burbank Studios, and continued until April the 15th. And the music for this movie is so good too. I mean, it's very, very memorable. It's very intense. I, again, being a really big nerd when I was a kid, I mean, I still am, but when I was a kid, like, I didn't buy rock cassettes. I bought soundtracks. So I had like Star Wars soundtrack, Close Encounters of the Third Kind soundtrack, trying to think of what other ones I had. I had all the Star Wars ones. I had E.T. I even had like a compilation of science fiction movies, greatest themes or whatever. I wore that tape out. I never did have the Star Trek II soundtrack, but I definitely remember watching this movie and thinking like, wow, this soundtrack is really good. And of course, James Horner's music is always just so good. The critical reception for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. This movie currently has a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, if you believe in Rotten Tomatoes. The film's success was credited with renewing interest in the Star Trek franchise. Mark Bernardin of Entertainment Weekly went further, calling The Wrath of Khan, quote, the film that by most accounts saves Star Trek as we know it, unquote. It is now considered one of the best films in the series. Pauline Kael of the New Yorker called the film, quote unquote, wonderful, dumb fun. So I don't know if I consider it dumb, but Pauline Kael was, she was pretty feisty from what I can tell. My thoughts on Star Trek 2, again, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, but this is definitely my favorite Star Trek movie, and probably one of my favorite science fiction movies of the 80s, if not all time. I watch this movie at least once a year. It's so good. It's so good. If you like Star Trek, obviously you know this movie. If you've never seen it and you like science fiction action with a little bit of creepiness to it, a strong villain in Ricardo Montalban here in this beautiful painting. I don't know if the artist's name is on here, but this movie has it all. The soundtrack is killer, as I mentioned. The acting is great. Ricardo Montalban is so good in this role. I mean, this has the famous William Shatner yelling Khan into the little microphone. Khan! The special effects, like the space battles, of course, at the end they're flying kind of like over each other and they can't detect each other in these kind of like space clouds or whatever. And so it's like really tense. The ships are like literally flying over each other. Like you're looking down on the screen, they're going like this, but they can't detect each other. Or the Enterprise is trying to like go stealth mode, and like it's so tense. Like I remember as a kid being in the theater watching that and like, just so tense, because I mean, you got to think at this time, Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back were out, and they were all about like the ships flying fast and blowing things up and stuff. But this was like methodical, almost like World War II battleships or something, and that comes on the heels of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which I forget the guy's name that directed that, but he was like he directed like some submarine movies and like war movies, and so it had that kind of like tactical kind of like art of war kind of thing going on, and this one is no exception. Of course, it had a lot of that kind of like moving your pawns across the board and like war games, if you will. So yeah, this was really, really good. Of course, the death of Spock in this was really, really heart-wrenching. I still kind of break up when I watch this movie, and I know you might think that sounds corny, but because I've seen this movie like probably over 20 or 30 times, but whenever Spock dies, I find that scene so hard to watch, and I won't spoil the future movies, but it still really bothers me, and it's so touching, because Spock saves the Enterprise from certain destruction by sacrificing his own life. The good of the one will outweigh the good of the other, whatever that thing that he says. It's really, really touching, and it's, if you grew up watching the original Star Trek series, that's a hard pill to swallow, because Spock's like, he's the man, he's the Zen guru guy, like the wise one that's, helps get this ship through problems and, through wars and things like that. So to see him go, it's like, oh, I remember at the movie theater, like, oh, even as a 12-year-old, I was like, oh God, this would have been like if Han Solo had been killed off in Return of the Jedi, which Harrison Ford wanted, but yeah, just a really intense movie. I mentioned the soundtrack is really good. The special effects are great. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the computer graphics, which now look very dated and probably quite quaint to somebody who has grown up long after that. But at the time, that was really, really crazy. There's the if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. The little bugs that they put in their ears to like mind control them. Khan uses these little bugs that he puts in your ear, and then they wrap around the cerebral cortex, and they make the person like open to suggestion. And so of course Khan exploits that by getting Chekhov and the other dude from the Reliant to like do bad shit for him. And so the story goes, this creature will eventually like drive you mad and kill you. But that scene was really disturbing. I mean, yeah, I wish I could remember the name of that guy, the other officer that was with Chekhov. There's a scene where he turns the laser pistol on himself and annihilates himself, and like you see his skeleton and you hear the scream as he's being like, committing suicide because he's going crazy with this bug in his head. It's quite disturbing. I mean, so yeah, this movie, Star Trek the Motion Picture, wonderful film, but this one, again, more gritty, more action. You got a concrete villain that you can focus on, just like, Darth Vader in Star Wars. You go, this is the bad dude. We want to take care of him. Or maybe you're rooting for him. I don't know. But my stepdad always rooted for Darth Vader, which, of course, upset me a great deal. But yeah, this movie is just excellent. It's an excellent science fiction movie. And like I said, where the first one is pure science fiction, this one's a bit more action science fiction, and leading right into all of those aliens and Predator and the Abyss and all of this stuff that was to follow. Of course, this one, to me, laid the groundwork for that, along with, of course, The Empire Strikes Back. But killer movie. Highly recommend this if you like science fiction, if you like Star Trek, any Star Trek. If you just like a good science fiction action film, this is your popcorn. This is your ideal Saturday afternoon, rainy day popcorn action flick. Awesome stuff. I'm just trying to think if there's other stuff. Of course, yeah, I think I've mentioned everything that I want to talk about. This edition is the DVD from 2002 from Paramount Pictures. It's a 2-disc set. It has 2 discs that are not very exciting, but I'm wondering if maybe there's supposed to be a booklet in here. I did buy this used, I think. This is the director's edition. As you can see, there's like tons of special features. If you want to pause that, I don't know if you can pause that and read that stuff, but just briefly, the disc 1 is the extended director's edition. There's commentary. Disc 2 is the captain's log, designing Khan, the visual effects of Star Trek 2, theatrical trailer, original interviews, Star Trek universe, storyboard archives. This thing is pretty loaded. Like, I remember when this came out, it's in a double disc case for some reason, but it's like laid out as a single kind of thing. But you can find these around I think they're fairly common, but they did the whole original Star Trek series movies in these collector's editions. I have part 1, 2, 3, and 6. I don't think I was a big fan of 4 or 5. I know those ones have their fans, but for me, the first 3, and then I jumped ahead to 6. I thought 6 was so killer. But you can currently watch this in Canada if you have a subscription on Paramount. You can also rent it on Google Play and Apple TV. As of the recording of this video, of course, I can't guarantee when you watch this video, so it may not be available when you finally get around to watching this, but this is pretty common. I see this on VHS and DVD. I don't see the Blu-ray around much, but probably someday I'll upgrade to Blu-ray. But for now, this is just a great addition. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Let me know your thoughts on this film. Did you love it? Did you not like it? Maybe you preferred the sort of slow burn stuff of the motion picture, but for my money, Star Trek never got better than this. And that's just my opinion. There's lots of other great moments in the Star Trek history, but for me, I always go back to this one. It's such a great thrill ride. So let me know your thoughts on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan in the comments below. Give me the thumbs up if you like this review. Of course, you don't have to. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. As of the recording of this video, I'm at 490 subscribers. So at my 500 count, I will be doing my favorite physical media covers, artwork. So I will be putting together that video. One of them is actually right here, which is the OG King Kong 76 with Kong on the Twin Towers. That's definitely going to be one on there, so that's why I kind of like popped it out for today's show. but that'll be coming after my 500 subscriber number. And if you have any requests for me, of course, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I did get a couple of recent requests, one of them being Extro, which was a great recommendation. I don't own that movie yet, but I have seen it and I do love it. So I'll probably try to get my hands on a copy of that soon. But sorry for going on so long, but you know, Star Trek II special movie deserves a little bit of love. So thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I will see you at the video store or at the thrift store or just out and about somewhere. Stick around later this week. I have the Woodlands Dark folk horror documentary, which is tomorrow on Cult Movie Tuesdays. And then on Friday, I'm doing body bags. And in between all that, I'm going to be having a brand new thrifting haul with a great big stack of stuff. So I know you guys like those ones, so be sure to tune in later this week for that. Until next time, take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.